The dangerous thing about childhood promises is that some men grow up powerful enough to keep them. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackstone Grand Hotel while I tightened the apron around my swollen waist for what felt like the 100th time that night. 8 months pregnant and working a double shift as a maid was exactly as miserable as it sounded. My lower back burned. My feet ached inside cheap black shoes from Walmart. And every breath felt heavier than the last. But overdue rent notices didn't care about exhaustion. Neither did electric bills. Neither did Ethan. Claire, penthouse suite, my manager snapped while shoving a silver tray into my hands. VIP guests. Don't mess this up. I nodded quickly and lowered my eyes the way I'd learned to do around angry people. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers while gold lights reflected off polished marble walls so clean I could practically see my own tired soul staring back at me. I looked awful. Pale skin. Dark circles beneath my eyes. Blonde hair pulled into a loose bun that never stayed together anymore. Pregnancy had softened parts of me and exhausted the rest. But it was the bruise near my wrist that made me tug my sleeve lower. Some things makeup couldn't hide. The penthouse doors slid open quietly, revealing a world that didn't belong to people like me. Manhattan glittered beyond massive windows. Men in tailored black suits stood near the bar drinking whiskey that probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. Expensive watches flashed beneath low golden lighting. The air smelled like leather, cedarwood, and money. Dangerous money. I kept my head down and pushed my cleaning cart forward carefully. "You're late," one of the men muttered. "Sorry," I whispered automatically. I moved toward the dining table, trying to ignore the pressure in my lower stomach and the tiny kicks from the baby. My baby always moved when I got stressed. Maybe he could feel it. Maybe children understood fear before they even entered the world. I reached for an empty crystal glass near the edge of the table just as laughter erupted behind me. My hand slipped. The tray crashed against the marble floor with a sound sharp enough to silence the entire room. Crystal shattered beside my feet. My pulse stopped. "I'm so sorry," I breathed immediately, dropping to my knees despite the pain shooting through my back. "I'll clean it up." "I'm sorry." Nobody answered. The silence felt wrong. Heavy. I looked up slowly and saw polished black dress shoes directly in front of me. Expensive. Italian leather. My eyes traveled higher. Black tailored suit. Silver watch. Broad shoulders. Then his face. And suddenly I couldn't breathe at all. Damien Moretti. The last time I'd seen him, we were both 17 years old standing beneath a broken streetlight in Brooklyn while he promised he'd come back for me someday. Now he looked like a man carved from darkness and expensive whiskey. Sharp jawline. Black hair brushed neatly away from cold gray eyes. The entire room seemed to orbit around him without daring to touch him. He stared at me like he'd seen a ghost. Then his gaze dropped to my wrist where my sleeve had slid back during the fall. To the bruises. To the faded little friendship bracelet I still wore after all these years. His expression changed instantly. Not softer. Worse. Controlled. Dangerous. "Claire," he said quietly. Hearing my name in his voice after 11 years nearly broke something inside me. I tried pulling my sleeve down quickly, but his hand moved first. Not rough. Not forceful. Just firm enough to stop me. His fingers froze against my skin as he looked directly at the bruises wrapping around my wrist. The room stayed silent. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Damien's eyes lifted back to mine slowly, and for the first time that night, I saw something terrifying inside the most powerful man in New York. Rage. The air inside the penthouse felt colder after Damien said my name. Nobody spoke. Not the men near the windows. Not the guard standing beside the doors. Even the piano music drifting through the speakers suddenly sounded distant, swallowed by the weight in his voice. I slowly pulled my wrist back, my pulse hammering so hard it made me dizzy. "You have the wrong person," I whispered automatically. It was a stupid lie. Damien Moretti had always looked at people too carefully. Even when we were kids. Especially when we were kids. His gray eyes stayed fixed on me, sharp and unreadable beneath the golden light. "Claire Bennett," he said again, quieter this time. "Brooklyn. East 14th Street. My throat tightened instantly. Nobody had called me Claire Bennett in years. Not really. At work I was just made number 6 on the overnight schedule. At home I was mostly silence. But hearing my full name and his voice dragged me backward through time before I could stop it. Summer heat rising from cracked sidewalks. Ice cream trucks echoing through apartment blocks. Damien at 17 leaning against the fence outside our building with bruised knuckles and sad eyes too old for his face. He had always looked dangerous even back then. Not because he was cruel. Because he looked like someone already carrying the weight of becoming cruel someday. "You used to steal peaches from Mrs. Lorenzo's fruit stand," he said softly. One of the men near the bar looked confused. Another immediately looked away like he understood he was witnessing something private. "And you blamed me every single time," Damien added. Before I could stop myself, a tiny laugh escaped my mouth. "Weak. Fragile. But real. Because you were terrible at running," I whispered. His mouth almost smiled. Almost. The expression disappeared the second his eyes dropped toward my stomach. Toward the baby. Something shifted in his face then. Not judgment. Something heavier. I suddenly became aware of how exhausted I looked standing there in a faded housekeeping uniform with swollen ankles and trembling hands while one of the richest men in New York stared at me like a memory he thought was buried. Embarrassment burned through me. "I should clean this up," I murmured quickly, reaching for broken crystal pieces scattered across the marble floor. Pain shot through my lower back as I bent forward. Damien moved instantly. "Stop." The single word froze the room again. One of the guards stepped forward immediately with cleaning gloves and towels while Damien crouched in front of me before I could protest. The sight alone felt wrong. Powerful men like him did not kneel for women like me. His expensive suit probably cost more than my car. Yet there he was, close enough for me to smell cedarwood cologne and rain on dark wool. His eyes searched my face carefully, almost painfully. "You are pregnant," he said quietly. I nodded once. "How far along?" 33 weeks. He glanced toward my wrist again. "And the bruises?" My stomach twisted hard enough to make the baby kick suddenly. Damien noticed immediately. His eyes softened for one terrifying second before hardening again. "Claire." The way he said my name made me feel 17 all over again. Safe and terrified at the same time. I lied softly. He stared at me for a long moment without blinking. Then his jaw tightened slightly. He knew. Of course he knew. Damien had grown up around men who lied for survival. He could probably smell fear the way normal people smelled smoke. One of the guards approached him carefully. "Sir, the meeting with the Russians starts in 10 minutes. Damien never looked away from me. "Cancel it." The man froze. "Sir." I said cancel it. Silence spread across the penthouse again. The kind of silence powerful men obeyed immediately. Damien slowly stood to his full height, towering over everyone in the room before extending his hand toward me. "You are not cleaning floors tonight, Claire," he said calmly. "You are coming with me." Every survival instinct inside me screamed not to take Damien Moretti's hand. Men like him did not offer kindness without consequences. Men like him changed entire lives with a single decision. And somehow, Standing there beneath the golden lights of that penthouse with my heart racing and my baby shifting nervously inside me, I knew mine had already changed the second he recognized me. "I cannot leave," I said quietly, keeping my eyes lowered. "I am still on shift." Damien looked almost offended by the sentence. "Claire." His voice softened slightly, but the authority inside it remained absolute. "Nobody here is going to tell you to mop floors tonight." One of the hotel managers suddenly appeared near the entrance looking pale enough to faint. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Holloway barely acknowledged me most days unless I worked too slowly. But now he looked terrified to even breathe wrong near Damien. "Mr. Moretti," he said carefully, "if there is a problem with the staff, I assure you it will be handled immediately." Damien never looked away from me. "There is no problem with the staff." The room stayed silent for half a second before his cold gray eyes finally shifted toward the manager. "The problem," he said calmly, "is that a pregnant woman with visible injuries is cleaning your floors after midnight." Mr. Holloway swallowed so hard I heard it from 6 feet away. I did not realize, that is exactly why you are no longer speaking." The manager immediately stopped talking. I had forgotten what real power looked like. Not loud voices. Not threats. Just one sentence spoken softly enough that everybody obeyed anyway. My hands tightened around the edge of my apron. "Please," I whispered quickly before things became worse. "I am fine." Damien turned back toward me slowly. "No," he said. "You are not." The honesty in his voice almost hurt more than the bruises hidden beneath my sleeves. Because nobody had looked at me in months and admitted the truth out loud. Not my neighbors who heard arguments through thin apartment walls. Not the cashier who saw me counting dollar bills for groceries. Not even myself. Being exhausted had become normal. Being afraid had become normal. Damien stepped closer carefully, like he understood I startled easily now. "When was the last time you ate something besides vending machine food?" he asked quietly. The question caught me so off guard I blinked. "What? You always stopped eating when you were stressed." My throat tightened instantly. He remembered that. After 11 years. Before I could answer, my stomach betrayed me with a small painful growl. Embarrassment flooded my face so quickly I wanted the marble floor to open beneath me. One of the men near the bar looked away politely. Damien did not. Something dark flickered behind his eyes again. Anger. Not at me. Never at me. That somehow felt worse. "How long have you been working tonight?" he asked. "Since 10 this morning." His jaw flexed slightly. "And your husband allowed that?" I froze completely. The word husband felt heavy in the air between us. Dangerous. "He is not," I stopped myself too late. Damien noticed immediately. "Of course he did." "He is not what?" he asked quietly. I looked toward the giant windows overlooking Manhattan instead of answering. Rain streaked across the glass while yellow taxi lights blurred below like tiny fading stars. I suddenly felt very small standing in that enormous penthouse with my cheap shoes and swollen ankles and aching back while Damien Moretti watched me like he was trying to solve a puzzle that terrified him. "Claire." His voice dropped lower this time. Softer. "Look at me." I should not have listened. I knew that. But I did anyway. And the second our eyes met, I realized something that frightened me even more than the bruises hidden under my sleeves. Damien still cared about me. Somehow. After all these years. After Brooklyn. After the blood and sirens and the night he disappeared without saying goodbye. The baby kicked suddenly against my ribs hard enough to make me wince. Damien noticed instantly. Every hard edge in his expression cracked for one impossible second. His eyes dropped toward my stomach, then slowly lifted back to my face. "Does he hurt you too?" he asked quietly. And for the first time that night, I could not answer him at all. The worst part about loving someone dangerous is how quickly your body learns to fear disappointing them. I stared at Damien across the golden glow of the penthouse while rain slid down the windows behind him like silver tears, and for one impossible second, I almost told him everything. About Ethan. About the apartment. About how carefully I had learned to move through my own life without making too much noise. But survival had trained me too well. "Nobody hurts me," I lied softly. Damien's expression did not change. Somehow that was worse than anger. He simply looked at me the way people look at cracked glass they already know is going to shatter. "Claire," he said quietly, "you used to cry every time you lied." Heat flooded my face instantly. "I do not cry." One corner of his mouth moved slightly. "You used to cry when your grilled cheese sandwiches burned." I hated that I remembered that. Summer afternoons in our old apartment building. Damien sitting on the fire escape outside my kitchen window while my mother worked late shifts at the diner. We had both grown up poor enough to understand hunger without discussing it. Sometimes I burned dinner because I was trying to stretch one loaf of bread across 3 days. Damien always ate the burnt pieces anyway. "You said burned food tasted more honest," I whispered before I could stop myself. His gray eyes softened for half a heartbeat. "I remember." Silence settled between us again, quieter this time. Not tense. Almost sad. One of the guards approached carefully holding a fresh glass of water. Damien took it without looking away from me and held it out slowly. "Drink." "I am fine." "Claire." Just my name. Deep. Calm. Dangerous in the way storms were dangerous before they arrived. My fingers trembled slightly as I accepted the glass. Cold water never tasted so good. I had not realized how thirsty I was until then. The baby shifted again, pressing hard beneath my ribs. Damien noticed immediately. His eyes tracked every tiny movement across my oversized housekeeping uniform like he could already sense when I was uncomfortable before I admitted it myself. "You should be resting," he said quietly. I almost laughed at that. Resting belonged to women with safe homes and maternity leave and husbands who brought home groceries instead of excuses. Not women like me. "Rest costs money," I said softly. Something cold flickered behind Damien's eyes again. "And he does not provide it." I stayed silent. Silence was answer enough. Damien exhaled slowly through his nose before stepping toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly below us. Thousands of lights glowing beneath rain and darkness while thunder rolled somewhere far away over the Hudson River. He looked completely at home against that skyline. Like the city belonged to him. Maybe it did. "Do you know why I bought this hotel?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "No, because when we were 16, you told me rich people slept differently." I blinked in confusion. Damien glanced back toward me. "You said poor people slept with one ear open." My chest tightened painfully. I remembered saying that. We had been sitting on the roof of our apartment building during a blackout while police sirens echoed through Brooklyn. Damien had blood on his knuckles that night too. "You said if you ever became rich," I whispered carefully, "you wanted one night of silence." His gaze locked onto mine again. "I still do." The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than his power ever could. Because underneath the tailored suits and bodyguards and terrifying reputation, part of Damien still sounded like the lonely boy from Brooklyn who used to sit beside me on fire escapes eating burned grilled cheese sandwiches. My phone suddenly buzzed inside my apron pocket. The sound shattered the fragile quiet instantly. "Ethan." My stomach dropped so fast it physically hurt. Damien noticed the change in my face immediately. "Who is it?" he asked softly. I swallowed hard. "Nobody." The phone buzzed again. Then again. 3 times in a row. Damien held out his hand calmly. Give me the phone, Claire. Fear crawled slowly up my spine because I already knew exactly what Ethan's messages probably said. And somehow, deep down, I knew Damien Moretti was about to read every single one. You can tell a lot about a person by the way they react to fear. Some people panic. Some people freeze. And some people, like Damien Moretti, become terrifyingly calm. I tightened my fingers around the phone inside my apron pocket while rain rattled softly against the penthouse windows behind us. Ethan kept calling. Over and over. Each vibration felt like a countdown I could not stop. Claire, Damien said quietly, holding out his hand again. The phone. I should have refused. Every instinct told me not to let those two worlds collide. Ethan was loud anger and cheap whiskey and slammed apartment doors. Damien was silence sharp enough to cut glass. But my hands were trembling too badly to think clearly anymore. Slowly, I pulled the phone from my pocket. Damien's eyes dropped to the screen immediately. Ethan calling. The name. Alone changed something in the room. Not visibly. Damien did not raise his voice. He did not curse. But every man standing nearby suddenly straightened slightly like they sensed a storm moving in. The phone buzzed again before I could silence it. A text message lit the screen. Where are you? Another appeared immediately after. You left without asking me. My stomach twisted painfully. Damien read every word without expression. Then another message arrived. If you are ignoring me again, do not bother coming home. I felt heat crawl into my face so fast it burned. Humiliation. Fear. Exhaustion. All tangled together until I could barely breathe around them anymore. Damien finally looked up at me slowly. He tracks your movements. I shook my head too quickly. No. I stopped. Because there was no good explanation. Damien glanced back toward the phone screen. Another text appeared. Did you take money from my wallet? His jaw tightened almost invisibly. How long? He asked quietly. What? How long has he been speaking to you like this? It is not a big deal. The lie sounded weak even to me. Damien stared at me for a long moment before exhaling slowly through his nose. You used to argue with teachers when they gave other kids detention, he said softly. Now you apologize for existing. The sentence hit harder than it should have. I looked away immediately toward the city lights outside the windows because suddenly my eyes burned. I hated crying. Hated it. Crying made people feel powerful over you. But exhaustion loosens things inside a person. Especially loneliness. People change, I whispered. Damien's expression darkened slightly. Not that much. Silence settled again while thunder rolled far away over Manhattan. The baby shifted beneath my ribs hard enough to make me press one hand against my stomach automatically. Damien noticed instantly. His eyes followed the movement with an intensity that made my pulse stumble. Has he been to your doctor appointments? He asked quietly. I stayed silent. Claire. He works a lot. Another lie. Ethan had not held a steady job in almost a year. He talked about investments and opportunities while I cleaned hotel bathrooms and skipped meals to stretch grocery money further. Damien knew I was lying again. Of course he did. One of his men approached carefully from across the room holding a tablet. Sir, he said quietly, the car is ready. Damien never looked away from me. Good. My stomach dropped. Car. You are leaving with me tonight. Panic hit instantly. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. Every head in the room turned toward us. I lowered my voice immediately. I cannot just disappear. Ethan will. I stopped too late. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. Will what? I wrapped my arms around myself automatically, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the penthouse. You do not understand. Then explain it to me. You cannot fix this. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Something painful flickered across Damien's face for half a second. Then disappeared beneath control again. Claire, he said quietly, I did not survive Brooklyn by ignoring problems. Another text message buzzed across the screen in Damien's hand. This one made the entire room colder. If you make me come find you, you are going to regret it. Damien read the message once. Then very carefully locked the phone screen. When he looked back at me, his voice was calm enough to terrify me. Nobody threatens you again, he said softly. Nobody. Some people mistake protection for control because they have never experienced safety without fear attached to it. I stood frozen in Damien's penthouse while thunder rolled outside the windows and tried to remember what it felt like not to brace myself before every conversation. Damien still held my phone in one hand. Calm. Perfectly composed. But the silence around him had changed. The men near the bar no longer looked relaxed. One of the guards quietly stepped toward the hallway and spoke into an earpiece without interrupting the room. I suddenly realized everyone here moved according to Damien's moods the way sailors watched storms at sea. I should go home, I whispered carefully. Damien looked at me for a long moment before answering. No, just one word. Quiet. Final. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself automatically. You cannot decide that for me. You are exhausted, underweight, and frightened every time your phone vibrates. His gray eyes dropped briefly toward my stomach. And you are carrying a child. Heat rose behind my eyes instantly because nobody had spoken about my baby with concern in months. Only inconvenience. Expenses. Timing. Problems. Damien crossed the room slowly until he stood directly in front of me again. When was your last doctor appointment? He asked quietly. 3 weeks ago. And everything was normal? Yes. Another lie. My doctor had warned me about stress 2 appointments ago after noticing my blood pressure climbing dangerously high. I had nodded politely while mentally calculating whether I could afford the new prenatal vitamins she recommended. Damien studied my face carefully like he could still read every emotion I tried hiding. Maybe he could. You always look left when you lie, he murmured. My breath caught. Stop doing that. Doing what? Remembering me too well. Something shifted in his expression then. Softer. Sadder. That was never something I wanted to forget. The honesty in his voice unsettled me more than his power ever could. Before I could answer, another sharp pain tightened low in my back hard enough to make me inhale suddenly. Damien noticed instantly. Sit down. I am fine. Claire. The warning beneath my name made my knees weaken slightly. Not because I was afraid of him. Because part of me still trusted him. And trusting someone after surviving disappointment feels almost more dangerous than fear itself. Slowly, I sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa near the windows. The leather felt softer than anything I had touched in years. Damien crouched slightly in front of me again, his expensive suit wrinkling without him seeming to care. How long have you been having pain? He asked quietly. It is normal. That was not my question. I looked away. Rain streaked across the glass behind him while Manhattan glowed beneath the storm like another universe entirely. Rich people slept differently. I used to joke about that when we were teenagers. Looking at Damien now, I wondered if powerful people breathed differently too. Slower. Colder. More controlled. One of the staff members entered silently carrying a tray with soup, tea, and fresh bread. I stared at it in confusion. Damien stood smoothly. Eat. I am not hungry. His gaze dropped meaningfully toward my stomach. Your son disagrees. The words hit me unexpectedly hard. My son. Ethan usually called the baby an accident when he was angry enough. Hearing Damien say it like the child already mattered made my chest ache in a way I could not explain. Hesitantly, I reached for the spoon. The soup was still warm. Homemade. Rosemary and chicken broth. My stomach cramped painfully with hunger the second I tasted it. Damien noticed immediately. Of course he did. Slow down, he said softly. Embarrassment flooded through me as I realized how fast I was eating. I skipped lunch. And breakfast? Silence answered for me. Damien turned slightly toward one of his men standing near the doorway. Find out where she lives. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Damien. His eyes returned to mine instantly. Calm. Controlled. Terrifying. I am done pretending this situation is temporary, Claire. Fear curled slowly in my stomach because deep down, I knew that voice. It was the same voice Damien used at 17 right before he stepped between me and 3 older boys in Brooklyn without caring what happened to him afterward. The same calm. The same certainty. And somehow, I already knew Ethan had no idea what kind of man had just walked into our lives. There is something heartbreaking about realizing the first safe place you have felt in years belongs to the most dangerous man you have ever known. I sat curled into the corner of Damien's cream-colored sofa while warm soup settled uneasily in my empty stomach and watched rain blur Manhattan into silver and gold outside the windows. The baby had finally stopped kicking so hard. Maybe he felt calmer here too. That thought should not have comforted me as much as it did. Damien stood near the fireplace speaking quietly to one of his men while the flames reflected across the sharp lines of his face. He looked older than the boy I remembered from Brooklyn. Harder. More controlled. But every once in a while, when he glanced toward me without realizing it, I still saw traces of the 17-year-old who used to wait outside my apartment building after school carrying bruised knuckles and stolen candy bars in his jacket pocket. Sir, the guard murmured quietly, handing Damien a phone. The address is confirmed. My stomach tightened instantly. Damien looked down at the screen for half a second before his jaw hardened almost invisibly. How bad? He asked. The guard hesitated. The building has multiple police reports for disturbances. Shame burned through me so fast I had to stare down at my soup bowl to hide it. Damien was silent for several long seconds. Too silent. Then he handed the phone back calmly. Have a doctor on standby. My head snapped upward immediately. No, both men looked toward me. I set the spoon down too quickly, hands trembling again. I do not need a doctor. Damien walked back toward the sofa slowly. Claire. I mean it. Panic rose sharper now because this was becoming real in ways I could not control anymore. You cannot just investigate my life. Your life. His voice stayed calm, but something colder moved underneath it now. You are working double shifts while 33 weeks pregnant. You flinch every time your phone rings. And you have fingerprints bruised into your wrist. He crouched slightly in front of me again, lowering his voice. That stopped being private the second someone put their hands on you. Emotion clogged my throat unexpectedly. You do not understand. Then make me understand. I looked away toward the rain again because that was easier than looking at him. Easier than remembering the version of Damien who once sat beside me on a rooftop promising he would build a life big enough for both of us to escape Brooklyn forever. He had kept his promise. Just not with me. After you left, I whispered quietly, things changed. Silence answered me for a moment. Then Damien spoke softly. I did not leave because I wanted to. My chest tightened painfully. We had never talked about that night. Not once. Not in 11 years. Brooklyn had exploded into police sirens and flashing lights and rumors about the Moretti family disappearing overnight. One day Damien existed. The next day he was gone like somebody had erased him from the neighborhood completely. You disappeared, I whispered. I waited for weeks. Something dark flickered behind his gray eyes then. Regret maybe. I know. The honesty in his voice hurt worse than excuses would have. My uncle took me out of the city after my father died, he said quietly. I could not contact anyone. You could have tried. Damien looked at me for a long moment before nodding once. You are right. No defense. No excuses. Somehow that made it harder to stay angry. The baby shifted suddenly beneath my ribs and I pressed my hand against my stomach automatically. Damien's eyes followed the movement instantly. Softened instantly. Does he have a name yet? He asked quietly. My throat tightened. No, you should choose carefully. Why? A faint sadness crossed his face. Because names become part of survival. I stared at him in confusion, but before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed again on the table between us. Ethan. 5 missed calls. 2 voicemails. 1 new message. Get home now. Damien read the words silently. Then his gaze lifted back to mine slowly. You are not going back there tonight, he said calmly. I opened my mouth to argue, but another sharp cramp twisted low in my stomach hard enough to steal my breath. Damien moved instantly. Claire. His voice changed immediately. Colder. Sharper. Protective in a way that terrified me because suddenly I realized something dangerous. Damien Moretti was no longer asking permission to care what happened to me. The human body remembers safety even when the mind forgets it exists. I realized that sometime around 2 in the morning while sitting beneath a cashmere blanket on Damien's penthouse sofa listening to rain tap softly against the windows instead of apartment walls vibrating from shouting downstairs. The cramp had faded after a few minutes, but Damien had not relaxed once afterward. He stayed close enough to notice every shift in my breathing while pretending not to watch me at all. You should sleep, he said quietly from across the room. I looked up from the untouched tea in my hands. Damien had removed his suit jacket sometime during the last hour, leaving him in a black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists. Even exhausted, he still looked impossibly composed. Powerful men probably practiced looking calm the same way soldiers practiced survival. I cannot, I admitted softly. His gray eyes studied me for a moment. Nightmares? The question startled me because he said it so casually. Like he already understood the answer. I looked down at the tea again. Sometimes. Damien nodded once like that confirmed something painful for him. Then he crossed the room slowly and sat in the armchair opposite the sofa instead of beside me. The distance felt intentional. Respectful. Another unfamiliar kind of safety. Do you remember the blackout during the summer before senior year? He asked quietly. I blinked in surprise. The heat wave? You were terrified of thunderstorms back then. A weak smile touched my mouth before I could stop it. You climbed through my bedroom window at 2 in the morning. Your mother almost shot me with a frying pan. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped me. Real this time. Damien's expression softened slightly at the sound. You made hot chocolate on a camping stove because the power was out. My chest tightened painfully around the memory. We had sat on the kitchen floor all night listening to thunder while Damien pretended not to notice every time lightning made me jump. You stayed until sunrise, I whispered. His gaze held mine steadily. I said I would. Silence settled gently between us after that. Not awkward. Just heavy with memories neither of us had touched in years. Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed silver beneath the storm while somewhere below us the city kept moving without caring that my entire life suddenly felt cracked open. My phone buzzed again on the coffee table. Ethan. This time a voicemail notification followed immediately after. Damien glanced toward the screen but did not reach for it. You do not have to listen to it, he said quietly. But guilt was a strange thing. It survives even when happiness does not. Slowly, I picked up the phone. And pressed play before I could change my mind. Ethan's voice filled the room instantly. Angry. Slurred slightly. Claire, answer the damn phone. Do you know what time it is? You embarrassed me tonight. If you are trying to punish me again, it is not going to work. You think you are better than me now because you clean rich people's apartments. My stomach twisted painfully. I moved to stop the recording, but Damien spoke softly. Let it finish. I should not have listened. I knew that. But part of me needed Damien to hear it. Needed someone else to finally understand the exhaustion of constantly shrinking yourself to survive another person's anger. Ethan continued ranting through the speaker. Complaints about money. About dinner. About me being ungrateful. Then his voice changed slightly near the end. Colder somehow. And if you are with another man, Claire, silence followed. The voicemail ended abruptly. The room felt freezing afterward. I stared down at the phone in my shaking hands while shame crawled slowly up my throat. He was not always like this, I whispered before I could stop myself. Damien's expression did not change. That sentence has trapped a lot of good people. Tears burned suddenly behind my eyes and I hated how quickly they appeared around him. You do not understand how hard it gets when you are pregnant and broke and alone. My voice cracked embarrassingly on the last word. Alone. Damien stared at me for a long moment after that. Then he leaned forward slightly, elbows resting against his knees. Claire, he said quietly, look around this room. Confused, I glanced toward the enormous penthouse, the city lights, the quiet luxury surrounding us. You are not alone tonight. The gentleness in his voice almost broke me completely. Because for the first time in years, I believed him. Then suddenly one of Damien's guards entered the room quickly enough to make my pulse jump. Sir, he said carefully, there is a man downstairs demanding to see Miss Bennet. Every ounce of warmth disappeared from Damien's face instantly. Ethan. The guard nodded once. He says if she does not come out, he will come up himself. The terrifying thing about men like Damien Moretti is not how quickly they become angry. It is how frighteningly quiet they become first. The moment the guard said Ethan was downstairs, every trace of warmth vanished from Damien's face so completely it made my stomach tighten. He stood slowly from the armchair beside the fireplace while rain whispered against the penthouse windows behind him. How did he get past security? Damien asked calmly. The guard shifted slightly. He has been causing a disturbance in the lobby for the last 10 minutes. My heart dropped. Oh God. Instantly, Damien's eyes snapped toward me. He is not touching you tonight. The certainty in his voice should have comforted me. Instead it terrified me because I suddenly understood something important. Ethan had no idea where he was. Men like Ethan survive by intimidating people smaller than themselves. But Damien was not smaller than anyone. I need to go downstairs, I whispered quickly, standing too fast from the sofa. Pain tightened sharply through my lower back and I grabbed the edge of the table automatically. Damien crossed the room before I could steady myself. No, please listen to me. My voice shook embarrassingly. If security throws him out, he will get worse later. Damien stared down at me silently. That sentence alone tells me everything I need to know. I hated how easily he understood things I had spent years trying to hide. You do not know Ethan, I whispered. No, Damien replied quietly. But I know men who confuse fear with love. The room fell silent again except for distant thunder outside the windows. My pulse hammered painfully beneath my skin while downstairs somewhere Ethan was probably yelling loud enough to wake half the hotel. Shame crawled slowly up my throat. Rich people in designer suits downstairs hearing my boyfriend scream my name like some drunk scene from a cheap movie. Damien noticed the humiliation immediately. "Look at me," he said softly. I did not want to. But I did anyway. His gray eyes held mine steadily. "None of this embarrasses you," he said quietly. It embarrasses him. Emotion burned suddenly behind my eyes again because nobody had defended my dignity in so long. I barely remembered what it felt like. Before I could answer, another guard appeared near the doorway. "Sir," he said carefully, "the man downstairs is becoming aggressive with staff." Damien's expression hardened instantly. "Enough." He reached for his suit jacket draped across the chair beside him. Panic rushed through me so fast it stole my breath. "Damien." He glanced toward me while buttoning the dark jacket calmly. "Stay here." "No," I stepped forward before fear could stop me. "Please do not make this worse." Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes then. Not toward me. Never toward me. Toward the situation itself. "Claire," he said quietly, "a pregnant woman should not have to negotiate her own safety." The truth in that sentence hit painfully hard. Because I had spent so long doing exactly that. Measuring moods. Predicting arguments. Surviving around another person's anger like it was weather. Damien stepped closer slowly until his voice lowered enough that only I could hear it. "You know what I remember most about you?" I blinked in confusion. "What?" "You never used to be afraid." My chest tightened instantly. Brooklyn flashed through my mind again. 17 years old. Leaning over rooftops. Laughing too loud in dangerous neighborhoods because we both thought surviving childhood made us invincible. Damien brushed one finger lightly against the friendship bracelet still wrapped around my wrist. "You protected everybody," he murmured softly. "Even me." Tears burned my eyes before I could stop them. "That girl disappeared a long time ago." Damien's gaze sharpened immediately. "No," his thumb briefly touched the faded bruise near my wrist so gently it almost hurt worse. "Someone just convinced her she was small." The elevator chimed suddenly somewhere down the hallway. Every guard in the penthouse straightened instantly. My blood turned cold. Damien slowly looked toward the entrance. "He came upstairs anyway," one of the men muttered quietly. Fear crashed through me so hard the baby kicked sharply beneath my ribs. Then Ethan's voice echoed faintly from beyond the penthouse doors. Angry. Loud. Getting closer. Damien did not move. Did not blink. But the silence around him became deadly. There are moments when a person realizes the life they have been surviving can no longer continue the way it was before. Mine arrived the second the penthouse doors opened and Ethan stumbled inside shouting my name while Damien Moretti stood silently between us. The contrast alone felt unreal. Ethan looked exactly like the chaos I had spent years trying to manage. Wrinkled clothes. Red eyes. Anger leaking from every careless movement. Rain soaked his jacket from the storm outside while his voice echoed too loudly through the elegant penthouse. "Claire," he snapped the second he saw me near the sofa. "What the hell are you doing here?" Instinctively, I flinched backward. Damien noticed. Of course he noticed. Ethan froze slightly then, finally registering the room around him. The guards. The skyline. The men in tailored suits standing silently near the walls. And then Damien himself. Calm. Perfectly composed. Terrifyingly still. Ethan's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "Who the hell are you?" Nobody answered immediately. Damien simply watched him with the same cold focus a wolf might give something already trapped. "Claire, get your stuff," Ethan snapped quickly, trying to recover control. "We are leaving." My stomach tightened painfully. "Ethan, now." His voice cracked sharply across the room. The baby jerked hard beneath my ribs at the sudden volume. Damien moved before I even realized it happened. One smooth step placed him fully between Ethan and me. The entire penthouse seemed to freeze. Ethan looked up slowly, clearly realizing for the first time that the man standing in front of him was not somebody he could intimidate with shouting. Damien adjusted the cuff of his black dress shirt calmly before speaking. "You do not raise your voice at her again." The softness in his tone somehow made it more frightening. Ethan laughed once nervously. "Listen, man, this is between me and my girlfriend." Damien's gray eyes never blinked. No, silence swallowed the room instantly. Ethan glanced around at the guards like he was finally beginning to understand exactly where he had walked into. "Claire," he tried again, forcing a fake smile onto his face. "Baby, come on. You embarrassed me tonight." "Baby." The word sounded wrong in his mouth now. Possessive instead of loving. Damien noticed it too. "Interesting," he murmured quietly. Ethan frowned. "What?" Damien tilted his head slightly. "You call her baby while treating her like a burden." Ethan's face hardened immediately. "You do not know anything about us." "I know enough." Ethan stepped forward before thinking better of it. "Look, I do not know who you think you are." One of Damien's guards moved instantly. Ethan stopped talking just as quickly. Not because anyone touched him. Nobody did. But suddenly 6 armed men were watching his every movement with terrifying calm. Damien still had not raised his voice once. "You arrived drunk at 2 in the morning, Damien said quietly. "You threatened hotel staff. You frightened a pregnant woman." His gaze sharpened slightly. "And you left bruises on her body." Ethan's eyes darted toward me. "Claire, are you seriously talking about our private business with strangers now?" Shame hit automatically because Ethan had trained me to feel guilty for everything. Damien noticed the reaction instantly. "Look at me," he said softly. "I did. You have nothing to be ashamed of." The words landed somewhere deep inside me like sunlight entering a locked room. Ethan scoffed loudly. "You think she is innocent? You think she does not push people? She cries over everything. She acts helpless all the time." Every sentence made Damien quieter somehow. Colder. "Enough," Damien said calmly. Ethan laughed again, but weaker this time. "Or what?" Nobody moved for one long terrifying second. Then Damien stepped slightly closer until Ethan had no choice except to look up at him. "Or you leave this building tonight understanding one thing very clearly," Damien said softly. "Claire Bennett will never fear you again." Ethan swallowed hard. I saw it happen. The exact moment he realized the man standing in front of him was not bluffing. Rain thundered against the windows behind us while silence crushed the room. Then Ethan looked past Damien toward me one last time, anger and humiliation twisting across his face. "You are choosing him?" My throat tightened painfully because somehow that was the wrong question entirely. Before I could answer, another sharp cramp tore through my stomach hard enough to make me gasp aloud. Damien turned instantly. "Claire." His entire expression changed the second he saw me double over slightly against the sofa. Fear. Real fear. And suddenly every man in the penthouse moved at once. Fear changes the sound of a room. 1 second the penthouse had been full of tension and sharp voices. The next, after pain ripped through my stomach hard enough to steal my breath, everything became urgent whispers and fast footsteps and Damien Moretti kneeling in front of me with terror hidden behind his controlled expression. "Claire," he said sharply but gently at the same time. "Talk to me." I gripped the edge of the sofa hard enough that my fingers hurt. "I am okay." Another cramp twisted low through my abdomen immediately, stronger this time. My breath caught painfully. Damien swore softly under his breath for the first time all night. "Get the doctor here now," he ordered without looking away from me. Somewhere behind him, guards moved instantly. Ethan tried stepping forward again. Claire, what is wrong? Damien stood so quickly the movement almost blurred. The room went silent. Ethan stopped immediately. Damien did not touch him. He did not need to. The warning in his eyes alone was enough. Leave, Damien said quietly. Ethan looked shaken now instead of angry. I did not do anything. Damien's voice lowered even further. You have done enough. For one terrifying second, I thought Ethan might actually argue. Then one of the guards opened the penthouse doors silently, and whatever Ethan saw in Damien's expression convinced him otherwise. He backed away slowly, rainwater still dripping from his jacket onto the marble floor. Before disappearing into the hallway, he glanced toward me one last time. Claire, call me when you calm down. The doors shut behind him. Silence crashed over the room again. My body finally relaxed slightly the second he disappeared. Damien noticed immediately. His jaw tightened hard enough to show beneath the light. He causes pain. Responses before he even speaks, he murmured quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Another cramp hit before I could answer. Damien was beside me instantly again. Breathe, he said softly. Slowly. I tried. God, I tried. But tears were already slipping down my cheeks from exhaustion and embarrassment and fear. I am sorry, I whispered shakily. Damien's expression changed instantly. For what? This whole night. My voice cracked badly. Your meeting. Your hotel. All of this. For a moment Damien simply stared at me like he could not believe what he was hearing. Then he crouched carefully in front of me again and lowered his voice enough that the rest of the room disappeared around us. Claire, he said quietly, you could never inconvenience me by needing help. The words broke something inside me completely. Fresh tears blurred my vision before I could stop them. I looked away immediately, humiliated by how emotional I had become. But Damien gently touched my wrist again, forcing my attention back toward him. Do not hide from me. The softness in his voice hurt worse than cruelty ever had. Because cruelty was easier to survive than kindness. Kindness made you remember how lonely you were. The penthouse doctor arrived minutes later carrying a black medical bag while thunder rolled outside the windows. She looked calm and elegant and completely unsurprised to be treating patients at 2 in the morning inside a billionaire's penthouse. Stress contractions, she said gently after checking my blood pressure. The baby appears fine, but she needs rest immediately. Damien stood nearby listening to every word with frightening focus. And, he asked quietly. The doctor hesitated slightly. She is severely exhausted. Shame crawled through me again. Damien's face darkened instantly. How exhausted? Not dangerous yet, the doctor replied carefully, but if she continues working these hours under this level of stress, it could become complicated. Silence followed. Damien looked down toward me sitting beneath the blanket on the sofa with swollen feet and tear-stained cheeks and bruises fading beneath my sleeves. Something about his expression then made my chest tighten painfully. Regret. Everybody out, he said quietly. The guards immediately disappeared from the room. Even the doctor quietly packed her bag and left after giving me medication instructions. Soon the enormous penthouse fell silent except for rain tapping softly against the windows and the distant hum of Manhattan below us. Damien remained standing near the fireplace for a long moment before finally speaking without looking at me. I should have come back for you. The confession landed softly between us. Heavy enough to change everything. I stared at him in silence while firelight flickered across his face. Damien, he finally looked at me then, and for the first time all night, the powerful Mafia boss disappeared completely. All I saw was the boy from Brooklyn carrying too much guilt in his eyes. I promised I would protect you, he said quietly. And I failed. Some promises do not die. They just wait quietly inside people until life gives them another chance to matter. Dawn arrived slowly over Manhattan, pale silver light spilling through the penthouse windows while the storm finally faded into soft rain against the glass. I had fallen asleep sometime near 4 in the morning, curled beneath a cashmere blanket on Damien's sofa with exhaustion pulling me under so deeply I did not even remember closing my eyes. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was warmth. The second was Damien. He sat near the windows in the same black dress shirt from last night, sleeves rolled to his forearms, staring out over the city with a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside him. He had not slept at all. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Powerful men were not supposed to look tired. But Damien did. Not physically. Emotionally. Like regret weighed more than exhaustion ever could. The movement of the blanket made him glance over immediately. His entire posture shifted the second he realized I was awake. Softer somehow. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. "Better." It was partly true. The cramps had eased after the medication. But something else hurt now instead. The dangerous feeling growing inside me every time Damien looked at me like I mattered. "You stayed awake all night?" He shrugged once like it was nothing. "I had work." I almost smiled at that lie. Watching me sleep is not work. One corner of his mouth moved slightly before disappearing again. Silence settled gently between us while early morning light painted the penthouse gold instead of cold silver. For the first time since arriving there, the place felt less intimidating. Less like a fortress. More like a home somebody had forgotten how to live inside. Damien stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen. "The doctor said you need actual food this morning. You listened carefully." I listen carefully when people are important. My breath caught slightly at the sentence. He said it so casually too. Like he did not realize how dangerous kindness became when someone had spent years surviving without it. A few minutes later he returned carrying toast, eggs, fruit, and fresh orange juice arranged neatly on a tray that probably cost more than my rent. "Damien, eat." I laughed softly despite myself. "You still sound bossy. And you still skip meals when stressed." He placed the tray in front of me before sitting across from the sofa instead of beside me again. Always giving me space to breathe. The baby shifted suddenly beneath my stomach while I reached for the orange juice. Damien noticed instantly. He does that a lot around me. I looked down at my stomach with surprise because he was right. The baby moved constantly whenever Damien was nearby. Strong little kicks that seemed almost excited instead of anxious. "Maybe he likes your voice," I murmured. Damien went very still after that. His gray eyes dropped briefly toward my stomach before lifting back to my face. Nobody has ever said something like that to me before. There was no arrogance in his voice. Only quiet honesty. My chest ached unexpectedly because suddenly I remembered all the rumors surrounding Damien Moretti. Dangerous. Ruthless. Untouchable. Nobody ever talked about him like a person. Only a legend people feared. "That is sad," I whispered softly. Something vulnerable flickered across his expression so quickly I almost missed it. Then his phone rang sharply across the room. Instantly. The softness vanished beneath control again. Damien answered calmly, listening in silence for several seconds before his jaw hardened. "I understand," he said quietly. "Handle it." He ended the call and looked toward me. "What happened?" I asked carefully. Damien hesitated for the first time since I had known him again. "Ethan returned to your apartment this morning." Fear twisted instantly through my stomach. "What?" "He damaged the front door trying to get inside." My hands started trembling around the coffee cup before I could stop them. Damien noticed immediately. "Claire. My baby things are there." My voice cracked embarrassingly. "The crib. The clothes," Damien stood without hesitation. "Then we will replace them." Tears burned behind my eyes again because rich people always said things like replacing a life was simple. But then Damien crossed the room slowly and crouched beside the sofa, his voice lowering gently. Listen to me carefully. I forced myself to meet his eyes. Nothing important to your child will ever be missing again, he said softly. Not while I am here. The promise settled deep inside me before I could protect myself from it. And for the first time in years, the future no longer looked completely dark. Sometimes the life that saves you does not arrive like a miracle. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as a man who remembers who you were before the world convinced you to become smaller. 3 weeks later, sunlight poured through the penthouse windows while Manhattan shimmered beneath the clear October sky, and I stood barefoot in Damien Moretti's kitchen wearing one of his oversized sweaters while our son slept against my chest. Our son. The thought still startled me every time it crossed my mind. Not because Damien had replaced anyone. But because somewhere between sleepless nights, doctor appointments, and learning how to breathe without fear again, he had slowly become the safest thing either of us had ever known. You are supposed to be resting, Damien said quietly from the doorway. I looked up with a small smile. He had loosened his tie after returning from an early morning meeting, dark hair slightly messy for once. Instead of perfectly controlled. Somehow he looked even more dangerous like that. More human too. I was making coffee. The doctor said no standing longer than 10 minutes. You suddenly trust doctors a lot. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Only the ones who lecture you. The baby stirred softly against my chest at the sound of Damien's voice. Immediately, Damien crossed the kitchen without thinking and rested one careful hand against the tiny blanket wrapped around him. The change in his expression happened every single time. The feared Mafia boss disappeared completely whenever he looked at our son. Softness replaced steel. Wonder replaced control. It still amazed me. He likes you more, I teased quietly. Damien glanced up at me immediately. Impossible. Damien, he stops crying every time you hold him. That is because he has good instincts. I laughed softly before the sound caught unexpectedly in my throat. Because peace still felt unfamiliar sometimes. Beautiful. Fragile. Like something life might suddenly decide to take away if I loved it too much. Damien noticed the shift in my face instantly. He always did now. What is wrong? He asked quietly. I looked toward the skyline outside the windows. Nothing. He waited. Calm. Patient. Claire. I exhaled slowly. I keep waiting for this to disappear. Silence settled gently between us while morning light painted gold across the marble counters and the sleeping baby in my arms. Damien stepped closer until he stood directly in front of me. Look at me. I did. His gray eyes held mine steadily. You survived years believing love meant fear, he said softly. Of course peace feels temporary. Emotion tightened painfully in my chest because nobody had ever explained my feelings so simply before. Damien carefully lifted the baby from my arms with surprising confidence for someone who once claimed he knew nothing about children. Our son settled instantly against his chest, tiny fingers curling around Damien's dress shirt. The sight alone nearly broke my heart. Powerful men were supposed to look unnatural holding babies. Damien looked like he had been waiting for this his entire life without realizing it. Do you know what scares me? He asked quietly while staring down at the baby. What? A faint smile touched his mouth. That he is going to inherit your stubbornness. I laughed softly through sudden tears. Damien glanced up immediately. Hey. His voice lowered gently. No crying before breakfast. You said that in Brooklyn too. Because you cried constantly. I did not. Claire. The way he said my name still unraveled me after all these years. Warm. Certain. Home. Our son stretched sleepily in Damien's arms before opening pale gray eyes that looked painfully familiar already.